The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame honors artists whose music, impact, and cultural influence reshaped the landscape. It celebrates originality, the rule breakers, the ground shakers, the ones who redefined what sound could do. And every name in the hall marks a turning point, a moment when music opened up and moved into new territory.
It's the fucking Rock and Roll
Hall of Fame! The class of 2025 is one of my favorites. From grunge to glam, rap to rockabilly, these artists didn't just top charts, they changed the course of music itself. I'm Allison Hagendorf. I'm a music journalist, the former head of rock at Spotify, and some people call me the Rockstar Whisperer. Somehow I turned being obsessed with music into an actual career, and now I get to share these stories with you. I've partnered with my friends at vinyl.com for a music series where I take deep dives into the albums that have shaped us. In this episode, I'm diving into the defining albums behind each 2025 inductee. I would love for you to hit the subscribe button as we continue to build this special music community together. As a thank you, please feel free to use my personal code, THEGROOVE, for 10% off of anything you buy at vinyl.com. That link and the code are in the show notes below. Let's get started with one of the most haunting, heavy, and enduring records of the 90s and one of my favorite albums of all time. Rock Hall inductee Soundgarden's Superunknown. By the time Superunknown dropped in 1994, Soundgarden had already broken out of Seattle's underground. But this was the record that cemented their legacy, and it completely changed my life. Superunknown expanded the edges of what rock could be, sonically, emotionally, and culturally. It was dark, driving, dense, hypnotic. It was heavy in a way that felt almost spiritual. It was a perfect storm of metal, punk, and psychedelia, and filtered through something primal and haunted. It was just gorgeous. Chris Cornell was the soul of the band. He wasn't just the greatest rock singer of his generation, he was one of the greatest of all time. He had the prowess of Freddie Mercury, the sensual energy of Robert Plant, and the emotional depth and dynamic range of his friend Jeff Buckley. And somehow he brought all of that into every song. His lyrics were cryptic, poetic, and emotionally charged, filled with existential weight, but always deeply human. Kim Thayil shaped Soundgarden's sound from the ground up. His guitar tone was heavy and strange in all the right ways. It was thick, sludgy, and just a little bit off-center. Ben Shepherd brought his own wild edge. He could lock in with the rhythm or completely push the song somewhere unexpected. Matt Cameron was the heartbeat. His drumming gave the songs movement and tension, always with feel and always with something clever just beneath the surface. Superunknown debuted at #1 on the Billboard 200, went 6 times platinum, and won 2 Grammys. But stats cannot explain what this album meant. Black Hole Sun felt like a surrealist lullaby for the end of the world. The video alone blew my mind, and I can remember the very first time I saw that video. I was mesmerized, enthralled, obsessed. Black Hole Sun, won't you come? Fell on Black Days was a breakdown set to melody. Spoon Man brought chaos to the radio. It was loud, it was strange, it was full of swagger, and it reminded you that mainstream rock could still be weird and wild. The Day I Tried to Live. I mean, it was a gut punch, a confession of trying to break free and still falling short. It spoke to anyone who's ever wanted more, but felt stuck in their own skin. It was loud, layered, cinematic, alive, and it still gets me every single time. Superunknown took grunge somewhere deeper and showed how heavy music could be just as emotional and complex as it was loud. And heartbreakingly, Superunknown became part of a legacy that was cut short.
This morning, the music world is remembering grunge rock pioneer Chris Cornell. Cornell died unexpectedly late last night. He was in Detroit and he was 52 years old.
I was incredibly fortunate to be in touch with Chris just before he passed while I was putting together the This Is Chris Cornell playlist for Spotify. And getting to collaborate with Chris was a life highlight. My guest is the godfather of grunge, who has been making music for more than 20 years as the lead singer of Soundgarden, Audioslave, Temple of the Dog, and as a solo artist. Chris Cornell, welcome to the Top 20.
Thank you.
What Soundgarden captured with Superunknown will always stay with us. For anyone who's ever walked through darkness looking for meaning, Superunknown was the album that met you there and never let go. When She's So Unusual landed in 1983, it didn't just introduce a new pop star, it introduced a force of nature. Cyndi Lauper had a voice that danced between power and fragility, sometimes from note to note, a 4-octave range with raw emotion and technical fire. She was wild, theatrical, and completely original. But behind the neon hair and punk pop attitude was a songwriter with depth, humor, and heart. This was the album that gave us Girls Just Want to Have Fun. It was a party anthem, but with a radical core. It was both catchy and liberating. It flipped the script on what women were allowed to say and sing in pop music. The song became a global sensation, peaking at number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, winning the first ever VMA for Best Female Video, and turned Cyndi into an overnight icon. It even inspired the 1985 teen film Girls Just Want to Have Fun, a movie that captured the spirit of Cyndi's anthem and cemented its place in pop culture history. But the album went deeper. With time after time, she revealed a softness and vulnerability that stunned people and proved she was far more than a quirky image. The track became an enduring classic, covered by more than 100 artists and named one of Rolling Stone's 500 greatest songs of all time. She's So Unusual went 6 times platinum in the US, earned her 2 Grammys, and became a multi-platinum declaration of independence. Cyndi became the first woman in history to score 4 top 5 singles from a debut album.
Who makes albums with 4 hits these days? Cyndi Lauper, that's who.
Visually, musically, and culturally, she opened the floodgates for self-expression in pop. Cyndi didn't just sound different, she looked different. She brought a punk rock ethos to the mainstream, blending thrift store rebellion with downtown New York flair. Her fashion was loud, layered, and unapologetically personal, and suddenly, girls everywhere were dressing like her, and I was one of them. And her reach didn't stop at the album. She wrote and performed The Goonies Are Good Enough, the theme song for The Goonies, which was the movie of the 80s for so many of us. Cyndi wasn't just part of the soundtrack, she was the spark. That energy we carried with us. And that message, self-expression, freedom, acceptance, it kept showing up long after the hits. And in 2013, she became the first solo woman to win a Tony Award for Best Score for Kinky Boots, a Broadway celebration of queer joy and resilience. In 2024, she hit the road for her farewell tour, and it sold out instantly. She was also the focus of the incredible documentary Let the Canary Sing, which reminded everyone just how deep her influence runs. You can hear that influence in Lady Gaga, in Pink, in Billie Eilish, and Chappell Roan. She's So Unusual wasn't just a debut, it was a turning point. It was a permission slip, a Technicolor revolution. Cyndi made the world brighter for anyone who ever felt a little different and needed someone to show them that that was more than okay. When Bad Company formed in 1973, they weren't just another British rock band. They were a powerhouse supergroup. Paul Rodgers and Simon Kirke from Free, Mick Ralphs from Mott the Hoople, Boz Burrell from King Crimson. They came in seasoned, confident, and built for stadiums. Their self-titled debut in 1974 was pure, unfiltered arena rock. Stripped down and bluesy, full of swagger, not the kind that's loud or showy, but the kind you just feel in your chest. And it ended up setting the tone for what rock would sound like through the rest of the decade. Right from the opening riff of Can't Get Enough, you can hear it. The space, the swing, the muscle. The guitars hit hard without ever going over the top. The grooves locked in, but still gave the music room to breathe. It didn't just move, it pulled you in. And right in the middle of it all was Paul Rodgers. That voice, soulful, gritty, effortless, like it was wired into the DNA of rock itself. Freddie Mercury, John Mellencamp, David Coverdale, they've all said he was a huge influence. And when I interviewed Sammy Hagar, he told me flat out, Paul Rodgers is my hero. That kind of respect says everything. And then there's the title track, Bad Company. It's dark, cinematic, and heavy with atmospheric. Feels like the soundtrack to like the last scene in a Western. It's mythic and haunted in the best way. The album went 5 times platinum in the US and topped the Billboard chart. It hit number 3 in the UK too, which was a big deal at the time. But the real legacy isn't just in the numbers, it's in the sound that stuck. You can hear their influence in bands like Foreigner, Aerosmith, Guns N' Roses. That gritty meets melodic vibe they helped shape. Just a year later, they dropped Straight Shooter with Feel Like Making Love, still a rock radio staple after more than 40 years. But it all started here with Bad Company. No gimmicks, no gloss, just great songs played by great musicians with nothing to prove and everything to say. In 1960, rock and roll was still figuring itself out, and then Chubby Checker gave it a new rhythm. Twist with Chubby Checker lit a fire under the culture, and when he performed it on American Bandstand that August, the crowd went wild. Suddenly, everyone was twisting, teenagers in rec halls, parents at parties, even Jackie Kennedy at the White House. That's how big we're talking. The single hit number 1 in 1960 and again in 1962. It's still the only song in history to top the Billboard Hot 100 in 2 different years. Eventually, Billboard named it the most successful single of all time. In 1988, he teamed up with the Fat Boys for a hip-hop version of the twist and climbed back into the top 40, connecting old school rhythm with a new generation. Checker didn't just put out records, he sparked dance crazes. Songs like The Hucklebuck, The Pony, and the CC Rider Stroll came with their own moves. He wasn't following youth culture, he was shaping it. He started movies like Twist Around the Clock and Don't Knock the Twist, racked up over 30 charting hits in the 60s, and turned movement into a pillar of pop culture when rhythm and rebellion fused and music became something you felt with your whole body. Chubby Checker brought fun to rock and roll and made it move, and in the process, he got the whole world up on its feet. Joe Cocker had this rare gift. He could take a song you thought you knew and make you hear it completely differently. His debut album, With a Little Help from My Friends, is the perfect example.
I wanna get power from my friends. I just keep trying.
Released in 1969, it introduced the world to that voice. Rough, soulful, unmistakable, and full of something real. The title track, originally written by Lennon and McCartney for Ringo, became his. He took it somewhere new, no longer light and playful, but now gospel-soaked, slow-burning, and powerful. When he performed it live at Woodstock, it hit even harder. It became an anthem, a cry for connection and survival in a moment when the world felt upside down. And for a whole generation, it stayed with them. Decades later, With a Little Help from My Friends, opened every episode of The Wonder Years. That shot of Kevin Arnold on his bike, home movie style, with Joe's voice underneath, it was instant nostalgia, a memory trigger every single time. For a lot of us, it still is. But the album went way beyond just one song. It also featured powerful covers of Feelin' All Right, Don't Let Me Be Misunderstood, and Just Like a Woman, all delivered with that bluesy, vulnerable intensity only Joe could bring.
I thought Joe was the most powerful rock and roll interpretive male singer I had heard since first hearing the iconic early recordings of Ray Charles. In my opinion, no one has since come even close to him as one of the great primal rock and roll vocalists of all time.
He was awarded an OBE for his contributions to music, won a Grammy for Up Where We Belong, and released 23 albums across 4 decades. And what he left behind is a feeling that still lingers in every note. If the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is about breaking molds, blending genres, and doing things your own way, Outkast is the blueprint. They didn't just change hip-hop, they changed what music could sound like and who it could speak to.
When I first heard Stankonia, I remember feeling like, man, music is going to a real far out place.
This was their fourth studio album and the first one they recorded in their own space. It gave them total creative freedom, and you can hear that in every beat, every lyric, every wild decision they made. They weren't looking around at what was happening in hip-hop. They were listening to Prince, Jimi Hendrix, Little Richard, George Clinton, artists who broke rules and built their own worlds. Funk, rock, gospel, psychedelia, even a little rave energy, all grounded in Outkast's unmistakable Southern voice.
Laundry did open up that gate for people to be Young Thug.
They broke down walls, so definitely Mavericks.
Everything was just different.
B.O.B. was explosive. So Fresh, So Clean was laid back and effortless. And Ms. Jackson, that melodic, vulnerable apology, hit #1 on the Billboard Hot 100 and became one of their biggest songs ever.
I'm sorry, Miss Jackson. Ooh, I am for real.
The album debuted at #2, went multi-platinum, and won Best Rap Album at the Grammys. Ms. Jackson also won for Best Rap Performance by a Duo or Group. And years later, Pitchfork named B.O.B. the #1 song of the 2000s. But more than the awards, Stankonia marked a shift. It pushed the language of hip-hop in a new direction. It made room for experimentation, honesty, and individuality. You can feel Outkast's impact in artists like Kendrick Lamar, Janelle Monáe, Tyler, the Creator, and in the whole Atlanta movement that followed, T.I., Future, Migos. But there's still only one Outkast. Stankonia isn't just a classic, it's a breakthrough, a boundary pusher, a reminder of what's possible when you stay true to who you are and turn that truth into sound. And it made one thing clear: Atlanta was its own kingdom. I got to visit Big Boy at Stankonia in Atlanta, and what a gift that was. And when I was hosting the Fuse Top 20 Countdown in New York, Big Boy came on the show, and we had the best time. I am just so grateful for their art, their vision, and the fearless way they created their own lane and invited the world to follow. The Rock Hall requires 25 years between a band's debut and eligibility. The White Stripes became eligible for the first time in 2023, and by 2025, they were in. That is a remarkably fast turnaround in Rock Hall terms and a testament to their undeniable impact.
When we went to England a couple months ago, we thought it was going to be a little tour, and we got there and it was just everything was sold out, and everyone wanted to do articles and photos and everything. NME wanted to put us on the cover of the magazine. They arrived alongside a wave of early 2000s garage rock revivalists like The Strokes and The Hives, but they carved out a space entirely their own, which was raw, haunting, and rooted in something deeper and more primal. Their fourth album, Elephant, released in 2003, was the breakthrough. And the lightning rod. It was recorded on vintage analog gear with no computers and no post-production polish. The album sounded urgent, ragged, and alive. It was like garage rock with teeth, blues with swagger, and punk with depth. Seven Nation Army opened the album and took on a life of its own. That riff became a global chant at stadiums, protests, even memes. You could not escape it. It's arguably the most iconic guitar riff of the 21st century, and it came from a duo with no bassist. But Elephant was never about one song. Songs like Black Math, Ball and Biscuit, There's No Home for You Here, and The Hardest Button to Button hit just as hard. The sound was raw. Jack's guitar felt wild but sharp. His voice bounced between preacher and punk, and Meg's drumming, it was all feel. No flash, just what the songs needed.
I'm just saying, name two great chick drummers.
Sheila E., Meg White from the White Stripes?
She can't drum.
She's a better drummer than you. At least she has rhythm.
The album went on to win 2 Grammys, reach #6 on the Billboard 200, and land on virtually every list of the best albums of the 2000s. Elephant proved that you could do more with less and sound bigger than anyone else doing it. After Elephant, they put out Get Behind Me Satan and Nicky Thump, toured Canada, which turned into the Under Great White Northern Lights doc, and ended things with one last performance on Conan's Late Night in 2009.
The White Stripes, everyone take a break, be right back!
By 2011, it was official. The White Stripes were done, but their influence was already baked in. Jack once said, the whole point of the White Stripes is the liberation of limiting yourself. And that idea took hold. You can hear the White Stripes DNA in Arctic Monkeys, Cage the Elephant, and a whole wave of modern rock. More than 20 years later, it still sounds like the future. 7 incredible artists are being inducted into this year's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame performer category, and I will be there cheering them on every step of the way. If you love music as much as I do, please hit that subscribe button and join this amazing community we're building together. And as a thank you, feel free to use my code THEGROOVE for 10% off of any albums you add to your collection at vinyl.com. I would love to hear from you, so please drop a comment below and let's keep the conversation going. And until next time, let kindness be your superpower.